Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. I am Gilbert McLean, sitting in for Mr. Orit Connor this morning. And today is Wednesday, the 9th of August. And of course it means we have reached the weekend, and I'm sure that there must be people who are happy about today. Oh goodness, I made a mistake. That was not, it's not Wednesday, it's Friday. That's why we're here at the weekend. Forgive me, it's early in the morning. We have reached the weekend, and I'm sure that there are folks out there who's happy that the weekend is here, so you can get a break from the weekdays and enjoy your weekend. In the studio with me is the co-host of the show, Dr. Steve McField, well-known attorney at law. And at this time, I would like to welcome all our listeners and invite them to call us if something is on their mind, if they want to share something, or to actually ask a question that we might be able to answer. And also welcome Mr. Steve McField. Good morning, Steve, and welcome once again to For the Record.
Good morning, Gilbert, Mr. McLean, and good morning to your listeners, local listeners, and to those who are listening to you and streaming abroad. It's a good morning. The traffic was not so heavy this morning coming down.
No, I found it fairly light myself.
Yes, and as usual, after the show on Wednesday, I had a lot of calls from people, and a lot of people meeting me in the streets and telling me what they thought about the show, and whether it was good or bad, or news, or good news or bad news, and whether the issues that we were discussing were good issues. And I can say quite positively this morning that most of the things that they said were good. I know that you have a matter this morning that we mentioned on Wednesday. I think it was on Wednesday we mentioned a matter, and
yes,
I think it has caused us now to make a follow up this morning. And I wouldn't mind if you would mention it as soon as possible.
Yes, definitely. It's something which has come about, and I have been asked by management to actually read it. But to inform the public once again about what it's all about, I think it might be best to actually read the article that the clarification has been issued about. Now, this was Wednesday. I got that one right. Maybe that was on my mind. Wednesday, August the 9th, which was Wednesday that has just passed. And the article says, and this appeared in the Jamaica Observer newspaper, ex-cop accused of holding woman by throat for court today. A former member of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, JCF, who was arrested on arrival to the island last Thursday and was subsequently offered $100,000 bail, is to appear in the Kingston and St. Andrew Parish Court today, along with a woman constable, on allegations that they had assaulted two women they had arrested. The ex-JCF member Odain Simpson, that's Odain Simpson, was last Friday offered bail when he appeared in court following an application by his lawyer, Linda Wright, on assault charge. The court heard that on October 12, 2012, while Simpson was a serving member of the constabulary attached to the Mobile Reserve, he and his then female colleague were on duty in the corporate area where the driver of a Toyota Coaster bus was signaled to stop. During a search of passengers, it is reported that both officers held two women by the throat. The women were later arrested. However, Wright, who denied the allegations during her application, told the court that her client went to the assistance of his then colleague as the females were resisting arrest. She also told the court that Simpson went to help the officer after relatives of the women had intervened. The attorney also raised concerns about the way in which her client was arrested. She told Parish Judge Simone Wolfe Reese that her client was not informed about the allegation and that the warrant for his arrest was signed in October, but that no one informed him of this, although he visited the island in May and even visited his colleagues at work. According to Wright, her client, who resigned from the JCF last December and now resides in the Cayman Islands where he has been working as a police officer, came to the island to visit his newborn child. Consequently, the attorney asked the judge not to enforce a stop order to prevent her client from leaving the jurisdiction as he needed to return to work. The judge, as a result, offered Simpson bail without any conditions. When police are being prosecuted, these matters, for some reason, take forever, so no conditions as he has to survive. And that was a quote, or it's shown as a quote from Wolfe Reese, who earlier, what I read, is the judge. And this has below a name tagged, I assume that would be the writer in for the newspaper, Tanisha Mundy. Now, what the management here has asked for me to do, for us to do, Mr. McField, is to read what the person from Jacqueline Carpenter from the RCIPS says. It says, "Dear media colleagues, given the below article," that one I just read, "published by the Jamaica Observer this morning, I would like to issue the below clarification. There is no police officer by the name of Odin Simpson employed with the RCIPS. Per the article below, this person would have been a recent hire, in brackets, December 2016, we have checked our records and we can confirm this person is not employed with us." Now there's a mystery, Mr. McField. How it can be explained, I really don't know. What I do know is that the Observer is one of the most regarded, respected newspapers in Jamaica, and how such an article could have been written and making the statement that is contained in it, I'm just puzzled.
And how could an attorney anywhere in the Commonwealth is an officer of the court? And how could an officer of the court advance an argument to the judge for bail in court, and when the argument was not true? That is the problem that I have, and I think it ought to be fully investigated, because that would be a slur on the Cayman Islands, really. A lawyer in Jamaica telling a judge that a particular person who was arrested was a policeman in the Cayman Islands and needed to get back to his job, and therefore the judge should not place restrictions on his bail, conditions on his bail. And the judge, believing what the lawyer said, that he's now a policeman working in the Cayman Islands and returning from time to time to visit his colleagues and his family. And now we have a statement from the RCIP, the Cayman Islands Police, saying that no such person is a policeman in Cayman Islands. Well, the question I ask is the person working on an assumed name? Does he have another passport? Or is he working on an assumed name in the Cayman Islands? And I think that we ought to not only ask the RCIP, but we ought to bring in the immigration in this too and ask them if they have any people in their database who has been coming and going from the Cayman Islands with that name or with some other name.
That certainly sounds like a practical and important approach to me. However, Mr. McField, we have to take a break at this time, and we'll be right after this break. We also have a caller, and that caller would just hold for us until we return. They would be the first person online. Welcome back to For the Record. I am your host, Gilbert McLean, sitting in for Mr. Orit Connor. And give us a call with whatever might be on your mind. There was a call holding. If that caller chooses to call back, do so by all means. We have actually read the reply from the RCIPS, who say that there is no such person working for the RCIPS as O'Dane Simpson, which contradicts what is and was in an article on Wednesday in the Jamaica Observer, where it says that such a person was working for the Cayman Islands Police Service, and that they had been allowed to return to their office by the judge, having had representation from their attorney. So Mr. McField postured certain things that may have taken place and how this could occur, but certainly it is something which we should find out about. I think that the management at the radio station here will also be making an inquiry. But I saw another email as well which says that the RCIPS are making an inquiry as well to the Jamaica Observer. So what will come of that? I don't know. But Mr. McField, this one is quite a mystery, isn't it?
And it's a mystery, and it would have not come to light if we have not been reading all the news media around the Caribbean in order to bring balanced news to our listeners. That's what we do before we come on the show. We do that before. We do that in the mornings when we get up early. We go to the news medias in the Caribbean. We go to the Gleaner. We go to the Observer. We go to the Bahamas. We go to Turks and Caicos Island, and we read all of those newspapers to see if there's any news that is significant that affects us. And that is, I would say, that is good journalism, and it's something. I am glad that it has caused an awakening in the minds of some people, and now we will see where the truth lies. Does the truth lie with the RCIP, with the Cayman Islands Police, or does it lie with the court in Jamaica, and with the court system in Jamaica, and we would like to know if a person who, if it's not this particular person, we would like to know if a person who is a policeman in Jamaica was arrested in a policeman in the Cayman Islands was arrested in Jamaica on a warrant. That's what we would like to know, and we would like to also ask the immigration department if they have any records of somebody leaving, going to Jamaica with a similar name, and may and again, I think it was in January or something when he went to Jamaica again to visit his family and his colleagues. We would like to know all of that because it's very significant that you can't have people coming in and going out unless we know who they are, and this raises so many questions as Mr. Miller, the person who started this radio station, say there are more questions than answers.
Quite so. Mr. McField, we have a caller, so let's take that call and hear what on the mind of that caller, or if he has a question. Good morning, caller. You're on for the record. Good morning.
One question or one statement, I should say. Can there be a photograph of the
Well, caller, there was no photograph in the newspaper,
Observer.
in the Observer.
Yeah, but can the authorities request one from the Jamaica courts or police or whatever of this individual?
I see no reason why they
Yes.
shouldn't and couldn't.
That would be very significant as well.
Definitely.
Immigration could say, well, okay, we have a person by this name, not by this name.
Or not by this face.
Yeah.
I think, caller, that's an extremely good recommendation.
Yeah, somebody could identify whether he works for the police here or not by having a photograph.
Yes.
Yes, God, I think that's a great, excellent idea, and I want to congratulate you for bringing that up. You see, and I think that would solve the problem. Even though it mightn't solve the problem without fingerprints too, because someone could say it's not me, but I think a picture then would narrow it down. Yes.
Well,
Take care.
thank you very much, caller,
Thank
for
you.
that suggestion. And we do have another caller. I see an indication we have another caller, so let's take that call. Good morning, caller. Please go ahead. You're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think it is a topic that needs to be investigated thoroughly, and I hope that it comes to a good conclusion. This morning, I also want to just remind the Cayman Islands Civil Service Association members and human rights that tomorrow morning at 9, from 9 to 12, we will be distributing the school bag for system members at the Cayman Rock Museum. So I just want to remind members of that, and we look forward to them coming out tomorrow.
Okay.
I want to wish everybody a healthy, beautiful weekend, and may God bless us all in the beautiful Cayman Islands and everyone around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. And that's something for the folks over in the BRAC to remember, that the Cayman Islands Civil Service Association will be there tomorrow with a distribution of backpacks for both junior school and senior school students, which is something good. So please bear that in mind. Go out there and get one for yourself. So, Mr. McField, going back to our discussion briefly, I think it was a good suggestion from that caller that if there was a photograph that could be matched to someone who may be here in Cayman or not here, and it would also basically solve the situation with the folks over in Jamaica, because they have an individual called Odin Simpson.
And yeah,
So maybe that's not the same person,
maybe that's not the same person.
or the same person with a different name.
Different name and so forth. And that reminds me of photographing and fingerprinting at the port of entry. At port of entry, because at the port of entry, you're not you do not have any constitutional right to be in the island at the port of entry. It's only after you have entered the port of entry that you have constitutional rights and you have protection. But if at the airport you have no protection, and therefore that is when they are the gatekeepers of the Cayman Islands, and that is when we should be very vigilant and careful about who we allow to come in and who we allow to come in our island legitimately. I mean, we cannot do much about those who come in illegitimately, except for being vigilant and to keep them out. And that's a problem that we have. But at least those who come across the border legitimately, we ought to know who they are, where they are, and what they're doing.
Yeah. That is for sure. And I am getting a signal that we have to take a break and go to the 8:30 news. So for our listeners, please stay tuned. You're listening for the record, and we will be back shortly. Welcome back to For the Record. And I understand that we have a caller online, so let's take that call in. That we've had a fairly long break there. So, good morning, caller. You're on the air. Hello? Good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
Good morning, Mr. Level.
That's for sure. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Farrington. The stuff you raised certainly makes sense, and there were instances of what you have cited that I can recall in the past with the break-ins and so on, and also the question of the legal aid at one point in time, Mr. Macfield. So, you know what the caller is saying, he just has a great memory,
That's right.
and
That's right.
he's not afraid to remind us of these things that have taken place.
And I noticed that the legal aid budget is now some 3 million, and we would have saved some money, but I guess I would rather somebody else comment on that, because they'll probably say it's sour grapes, because we didn't they didn't appoint us to and help us to get the legal aid the independent legal aid office set up, so that everybody in the Cayman Islands who could not afford an attorney would have legal aid, whether it was criminal or civil matters or domestic matters. That was what it was all about. But at least we're making some progress. We're at least we're making some. It's slow, but at least we're making some progress. And notwithstanding the fact that they stopped us, it's following on. Not exactly the same way we wanted, but it's following on there, and it will get there someday, probably in the next lifetime. 100 years from now, it'll get there. But so is progress in the Cayman Islands. So is progress. Progress in the Cayman Islands is reactive progress, and so it will probably get there some other time.
Well, what Mr. Farrington is referring to is actually a story here on page 6 of the Caymanian Compass of today, which says that the Judicial Administration on Thursday announced the appointment of Cayman's first legal aid director, Stacey Park. MS Park's new role, effective August 7, replaces the administration of legal aid by a panel of Grand Court judges led by Acting Legal Aid Director Nova Hall, pursuant to the creation of 2015 legal aid law, although Chief Justice Anthony Smelly dealt with most applications. The Chief Justice welcomed MS Park, saying she would, quote, bring to bear a pragmatic but fair and balanced approach to the administration of legal aid in keeping with the new regime of the 2015 law, end quote. So the story as printed by the Compass can be read on page 6. So for those who might want further information, there it would be, and that would be the page where you would find it.
Yes.
But Mr. Macfield, another area of a legal nature is, again, what appears on the front page of the Caymanian Compass of today, Friday the 11th. And I find that very interesting, because somehow, to me, not a lawyer, but it seems somewhat contradictory, really. And again, for the information of those who do not buy the newspapers, and this particular newspaper, and swear they won't again, but still it has the monopolistic position of being the only daily print media. This is a big headline here: Court eases election disqualification rules. And I'll just quote some excerpts. It says, a Grand Court ruling issued this week will likely make it easier for political candidates who are born outside the Cayman Islands to stand for election, regardless of the number of days they have been absent from the jurisdiction before candidate nomination day. The Cayman Islands Constitution Order 2009 requires a Caymanian candidate who was not born in Cayman to be resident for at least 7 years preceding the nomination date, only allowing them to be absent for up to 400 days during that 7-year period. The judgment issued August 8 applied to an election challenge filed against the eligibility of Georgetown South candidate Alric Lindsay. Mr. Lindsay, who had spent about 797 days away from Cayman in the past 7 years, was allowed by Chief Justice Anthony Smelly's ruling to run in the May 24th general election. Mr. Lindsay subsequently ran in Georgetown South, where he finished third out of 5 candidates. The Chief Justice noted in his judgment that the objection from the election supervisor to Mr. Lindsay's candidacy was the lone issue brought against him after questions about his Caymanian parentage were settled. Justice Smelly indicated that in Mr. Lindsay's case, it would have been, quote, unduly rigid, end quote, and, quote, unreasonable, end quote, given the intent of the territory's constitution to disqualify him. It is a matter of common knowledge that Caymanians regularly travel to and from the islands for work, business, or leisure, such that many days or even weeks or months of absences for such reasons will often occur without any discontinuity of one's ties or commitment to the islands, quote, end quote, Justice Smelly wrote. The Chief Justice said it would be, quote, absurd, end quote, to consider the 400-day period an automatic disqualification in every case. And quote again, an unduly rigid approach which would involve the supervisor of elections calling for second here, I will have it in a moment. I hope oh yes, that is. Calling for the supervisor of election to have calling for the travel history of every declared candidate who happened to have been born outside the islands, for an arithmetic tabulation of every day of absence from the islands over the course of 7 years preceding a nomination day would be both an impractical and unreasonable application of the broad language of the Constitution, end quote, the Chief Justice wrote. But what isn't very clear to me, Mr. Macfield, is, I mean, if broad language or not, but isn't that a qualification, a requirement that's set down in the Constitution for candidates to meet?
And the compass is not accurate, because it's not only for people born outside the Cayman Islands, it's people born inside the Cayman Islands. And this is what it says in the Constitution. It says the qualifications that he or she is a qualified citizen, and either he or she was born in the Cayman Islands or was born outside the Cayman Islands in the circumstances questioned in Section 2B, has resided in the Cayman Islands for a period of not less than 7 years immediately preceding the date of his or her nomination for election, and subject to Section 3, the number of days on which he or she was absent from the Cayman Islands in that period does not exceed 40 days. Now, 400 days. Now, that is the requirements to be able to stand for elections in the Cayman Islands. Now, that is not all written in concrete, because Section 3 goes on to say, in ascertaining whether a person has been absent from the Cayman Islands for the purpose of Section 1C I just read, any period of absence by reason of the following shall be disregarded. So Section 3, 1, 2, 3, gives 5 exemptions to the 400 days. The performance, if you are performing duties on behalf of the Cayman Islands government, that means if you were in London, for instance, working in the London office and on behalf of the Cayman Islands government, and you were there for more than 400 days out of the 7 years, and you want to come back to run the election, you can do so. The second exemption is attendance as a patient at any hospital, clinic, or other medical institution. If you were hospitalized away from the Cayman Islands in a clinic or other medical institution, and you are there for more than 400 days, after that you can come back and run. The other exemption is your employment as a seaman around an ocean-going vessel. That means if you're working for National Bulk or for Swanee or for Keystone Ship and Company or any of those ships, and it's an ocean-going vessel, not going from the North Sound to the Singapore City, and you're away from Cayman Islands for 400 days, you can run. And the other one says that if you are attending as a student at any educational establishment, if you're going to a university or college or something as a full-time student, as a student at any educational establishment, and you're there for more than 400 days out of the seven years, you can come back and run. And the last one says that if you are employed as a crew member in any aircraft, so if you are working on an airplane that's going back and forth, and you are away from Cayman Islands for more than 400 days out of 7 years, you can run. Now that has to be a reason for why the drafters of this constitution put all of those requirements in the constitution. And you were discussing some of them before during the break, and I would like to hear what you have to say about them.
Yeah, well, we have to take a break right now, but when we come back here, let's explore this further. You're listening to For the Record. Please stay tuned. We'll be back right after these messages. Welcome back to For the Record, where I am your host, Gilbert McLean, sitting in for Stuart Connor, and with me is the co-host of the show, attorney Dr. Steve McField. And when we went to the break, Mr. McField was commenting on an area of the Constitution that speaks to the qualification for a person to be able to actually stand in the election, and a recent written ruling by the Chief Justice in this particular regard. And the compass says that the ruling might likely make it easier for political candidates who are born outside the Cayman Islands to stand for election, regardless of the number of days they have been absent from the jurisdiction before nomination day. Well, as Mr. McField, you pointed out, it's not just for persons born outside the Cayman Islands, it's also for Caymanians who are born in the islands.
That's right.
And the question is about the number of days, which accumulatively should not exceed 400 days. And I mentioned to you that this was something that came up back, I remember, in the 1991 when it was being discussed. Then you'll recall that Governor Scott had appointed a committee to look at the Constitution. And I remember this coming up in discussion. There were like Mr. Benson Ebanks, Mr. Norman Bodden, myself, Mr. Linford Pearson, Roy Bodden, and the rest of us at the time. And it came into discussion. And one of the things that was put forward or discussed at that time was, you could have a situation where a Caymanian who had left the country, been out of the country for a long time, might be loaded with a lot of money, comes back to Cayman, a real good talker, could purchase lots of PR and so on, plop themselves into the election process, and by manipulating that money in one way or the other, and there are many others, they could get themselves elected without having and have lost generally touch with what was happening here in Cayman, and their intent might be questioned. So it was felt at that time that having that there and leaving that there was important, because it saw to it that people who got in our election process would be those who were really connected to the Cayman Islands, and not just anybody popping out of the woodwork or coming back to the island after so many years away, and that was one of the reasons why it was left there then, and it's still that way now.
Yes, and that has to be clear because the Constitution, the Section 1 of the Constitution, even makes it's very lenient. It says all between in 7 years, all the days that you accumulated is 400. So it doesn't say one particular period of 400 days. And the Compass reports, and it says that during a hearing, it says concerning the matter held early this year, Mr. Lindsay argued that the primary reason for his extended absence from the island was to learn Spanish in order to expand his business into Latin America. The court found that he always maintained his property and business here, and that his level of attachment and commitment to the islands could never have been seriously in doubt. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is whether or not he was away for 400 days out of the 7 years prior to the nomination day. That is the question. And the Constitution goes on to give an exemption of the 400 days in Mr. Lindsay's case. And it says here, and I'll read it again. If you were attending as a student at any educational establishment, but Mr. Lindsay didn't tell the court that he was a student at any educational establishment. He said he just went off to learn Spanish. You can go learn Spanish in a bar. You can go learn Spanish on the streets. You can go learn Spanish anywhere. If he had said that he was a student at an educational establishment learning Spanish, I would not have quarreled with this decision. But the elections office was right to challenge his nomination based on what he said, and based now on what he said he told the court. So I don't understand why he said that the Constitution is being interpreted this way, because it's quite clear to me, even to a lay person, what I just read, that the absence of your presence can't be more than 400 days away from the country in 7 years prior to the election. Now, who does not understand that?
Exceptions.
Those are the exceptions, and then there are 5 exceptions. Mm-hmm. If you have to place yourself in one of those exceptions, and the problem is with these kind of decisions is that there's no appeal from them. In every other election court in the Commonwealth, there is an appeal from the first instance decision to the Court of Appeal. So you can see whether or not the first instance court was right or wrong. So here we are with these first instance cases, and we don't know whether they're right or wrong because we have not tested them on the Court of Appeal, the higher court, to see whether or not what the lower court said is right or wrong. That has to be something that the legislators now should be looking after. And I've heard many of them said when they were running for election that was one of the things that they were going to be looking about. But I have not heard one of them said that that's on their agenda today or tomorrow or the next week.
It's been rather silent. Mr. McPhail, we seem to have another caller, so let's go to that caller now. Good morning, caller. You're on for the record. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Georgette. Right off, I couldn't really say, but certainly we can give an undertaking to try to find out it. You know, at the beginning of every meeting of the House in the past, there were standards questions asked like that. You know, how many uh, police officers are there in the Cayman Islands police force, with a breakdown by rank and nationality. So we knew these were things that always came back, just like questions which asked for the number of civil servants in government with a breakdown by post and nationality. But I don't hear that type of thing too much anymore. But I really don't know. I couldn't say. I don't know, Mr. McField, if you have any idea.
No, Miss Georgia, I don't have the answer for you. I don't know how many foreign policemen are presently in the Cayman Islands police force, and I don't know how many Caymanians are presently policemen are present in the Cayman Islands police force. As Mr. McLean said, at one time in the legislature, at the beginning of the legislature, especially when it comes to budget time, the members of government would usually get a breakdown of how many people were in the police force by nationality, by rank, and by gender. They would have that, because it was very important to us that we get as many Caymanian policemen, and not only policemen but customs officers and fire officers and prison officers and immigration officers as possible. That was something that nearly every time that the legislature met, and especially after an election, that those questions were the standard questions that the government all wanted to have. I don't see it here now, because I guess it's not relevant anymore to some people who are now sitting in those chairs that some great men had sat there before. And so I don't have the answer to you, Miss Georgette, but I tell you, Miss Georgette, I will get the answers for you. And the next time we come, either Monday or Wednesday, I will have those answers for you, and I'll be able to tell you what the figures are.
Thank you very much, Mr. McField. And at this point, we need to go to another break, so please stay tuned. You're listening for the record. Welcome back to For the Record, where we continue our discussion with the co-host of the show, Mr. Steve McField, well-known attorney at law. And we were asked just before we took the break, Mr. McField, by Ms. Georgette about the numbers in the force, but neither of us really know it. But we'll certainly try to find that out, because it should be interesting what it actually shows, what it actually reveals. I think we have one caller, so let's go to that call now. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. Good morning.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Farrington, for calling back on that issue. I've heard a couple of occasions where the former Caymanian police officers who would go back into the service, and they left at a certain rank, and their expectation was that they would go back at that rank, but they're told, well, you know, you if he considered taking you back, you would have to come back at a lower rank and also at the bottom of the salary, which
You come back as a constable.
it's not that's not so very appealing, to say the least. Mr. McPhail, there was something else that you actually attended, and that was a meeting over at South Sound. Was I earlier this week or
Yes,
the latter part of last week?
Yes.
It could have been a Friday night. I don't remember exactly. But there was a meeting called over there at the South Sound Civic Center where the matter of the Jackson Point tank field was discussed, and I actually saw where you offered some comments, and it was interesting to see what the various persons had to say. It seems like all were really concerned about the speed or the lack of speed with which the communication went out to persons who were being asked to leave the area and had to leave. Then others wanted to know who would pay for their homes if they were burned, and others wanted an investigation into just why did the fire start, which does seem to be a very important and rational thing to want to know. And up until now, we haven't heard, or at least I haven't seen anything that says there's going to be a special investigation by government, impartial investigation. Saul does seem to be doing something in that regard, and I have seen also where they say they will compensate people who had to leave their homes and paid for their accommodation during the night. And some demanded that there should be criminal prosecution if it was found that things went wrong. But your position was different in that you questioned the tanks continuing to remain there, and in effect that there should be work undertaken to find where else they could be located, if I'm correct in
That's correct.
what you
And I
said.
was surprised that most of the complaints was, like as you said, and for compensation, but there were not too many people talking about removing the hazard from where it is. It seems to me that there are two great hazards in Georgetown. One is a hazard to health, which is the dump. It's a hazard to health, and one, the time twist, is a hazard to life. And it seems to me that to talk about how the fire started and things like that, that's all preliminary and peripheral. But what they should be talking about is removing that danger from a residential neighborhood where you have there's a real chance and danger of people getting killed if there's an oil spill. And I don't care what they say about they have wall around it and how safe the tanks are. There is a danger there that if one of those tanks was erupted with 500,000 gallons of oil, of fuel, that something will happen. There's a possibility if it happens in the night that people would lose their lives, not only in the adjacent area but on surrounding areas as well. And that brings me to the report that you told me about, and you happened to be able to give me a copy yesterday of that report. Now that report was finished in November 1979, and it was a report.
If we can just pause and go to the news, we're right at news time. If we can just pause there, because I think it's very important what you are saying there, and then we can go into greater detail. You're listening to For the Record. Please stay tuned. We're going to the news, and we'll be right back after that. Welcome back to For the Record, and before we go into a discussion, Mr. McPhail, there's one call, so let's take that call. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Gilbert, and good morning to Dr. Steve.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Well, just to give you an update, I would say about 3 weeks ago, I spoke to Chuck Rankin, official in the police force, and he assured me that the police that is in charge up there, and the district commissioner would be, as I understood it, informing me of a meeting with me and the district commissioner and the guy that is in charge up there. Now, today, I checked my box this morning, and I see no information there so far. And I am just wondering if he was just putting me off because figuring that I would forget about it, but I don't really think I was forgetting about it. And I was just, to me, it doesn't take that long to get from the admin building in Cayman to the admin building up here. So I am just inquiring and wondering if, as the surveyor's team surveyed, and they surveyed the property between me and the police station, but they just put out a map, and there was no one in the network official could possibly say anything to me about this use that the police have been doing. And I am not giving up on it because you should clearly state that any property that one might have and the government uses it, the person must be compensated for it immediately. Now, I mean, I'm not discouraged because I'll never get discouraged with trying to get something that is right for mine. And I feel that, if the official that informed me, if he was just putting me off just to get me away from the job, I don't know. But
I'll call it, maybe because the fact that they have sent someone to survey it might be that it's getting closer to where you would want it to be. I don't know, Mr. Macfield, if you would have any information leading to it, but
that happened a couple of days after I had to meet with him, and so far I haven't heard anything from anyone.
okay, well,
Well, I
you know,
would-
things are slow in government, so
Caller, it seems to me that you have a legal matter, civil matter with the government. I would suggest that you hire an attorney to represent you.
I've spoken to quite a few attorneys, but the pressure that I get, no one was seeing that interested in getting being an attorney. I can say no for that.
well, you know, you're speaking to one here on the radio, so
I know. You are the so easy that you have to have for other things. I just know. And furthermore, I mean, speaking of the legal aid, I would definitely need some legal aid to even get an attorney.
Well,
Well-
it seems to me that you should make an application to the legal aid, the directive legal aid for legal aid in that matter, because I think it's a matter that if you can't afford an attorney, then you probably would be eligible for legal aid on the situation in which you're in. I would suggest that you find an attorney and that you apply for legal aid and you try to get this thing finished, because I don't think that you're going to get it done on your own, because it seems to me that from my experience with governments and with other institutions, that once you were a lay person and they think that you don't know what the law is and things like that, they don't really pay much attention to you, or they will drag you out as long as possible, so that with the intention that, well, if we drag him out as long as possible, that you'll take what the offer is and walk away with it. And I think that I think it seems to me you need legal representation.
well,
Well, I think you could call the director of legal aid, and then you could ask them to send you by email a copy of the legal aid applications.
well, thank you very much, caller. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Macfield, we go back to the discussion with regards to the Jackson Point and the tank farm.
Yes. Well, as I said before, there is a November 1979 report to the United Nations on the petroleum situation in the Cayman Islands. And the report was done by Van Meurs and Associates Limited at 381 Churchill Avenue, Suite number 2, Ottawa, Canada. It was done by a Canadian firm on behalf of the United Nations. It's quite interesting. It's a very in detailed report, but I'll try to read a few things from it so that people can get the gist of what it says. It says the petroleum situation in the Cayman Islands, summary of findings and recommendations. Now this was in 1979, and it says security of supplies. The Cayman Islands will consume about 262,000 barrels of petroleum products in 1979. This is more than 16 barrels per capita. This level of petroleum consumption per capita is higher than the UK or Saudi Arabia. That was in 1979. Let's stop there now, Mr. McLean.
I wonder what it would be if such a study was done nowadays.
Yes, yes. And then it goes on to say the very high level of consumption can be explained by the fact that 50% of the needs are directly attributed to the tourist industry. This industry is very energy intensive and is the main source of economic wealth in the Cayman Islands. That was back in 1979. We have the other industry now. We have the offshore financial industry now that is the other 50%. And then it says the total storage capacity is only 63,000 barrels shared among Esso, Texaco, Home Supplies, and Caribbean Utilities. This represents almost 90 days' supplies. The storage is unequally divided over the various products. For instance, jet fuel storage capacity represents only 45 days consumption, and the actual volume of barrels stored is during most of the time much less than the capacity of the tanks, and is generally not enough then for more than 5 to 6 weeks. And that talks about the storage, and then it goes on to say about the prices. But let's get to the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about. And then it says environmental considerations. In general, the facilities of the three importers appear reasonably well operated and maintained, particularly the Esso terminal. Esso and Texaco are now jointly using an offshore marine mooring facility which provides adequate protection to the reefs. LPG tankers are not using this facility, which continues to cause damage. Both the Esso and Texaco terminals are overcrowded. The tanks are too close together, and it is likely that if one of the tanks catches fire, all tanks will go up in flames. This is a serious fire hazard. The wall in the Esso terminal and dike in the Texaco terminal surrounding the tanks is too low and insufficient to hold the storage volume of the tanks, and is required by generally accepted standards. In the case of a major accident, large volumes of oil will spill out into the sea, causing serious damage to a large part of the west coast of Cayman Islands. Energy conservation and alternative energy sources. The potential for energy conservation in the islands is limited, as 50% of the consumption is related to the tourist industry. The petroleum needs will therefore expand along with the economic activity. However, gasoline consumption could be reduced significantly by reducing the average size of cars and providing better public transportation. The use of solar water heating, solar cooling, and electricity generated on the basis of biomass of wind should be evaluated as possible alternatives and renewable energy sources. And he says security of supplies. It is strongly recommended to increase significantly the storage capacity on the Cayman Islands. It is not recommended to expand the current facilities. A new tank farm in excess of 100,000 barrels could be considered inland from the current terminal and southwest of the airport, connected by a pipeline to the current marine offloading facilities, and a small 3-inch line to the tank farms of Esso, Texaco, and Home Supplies, and even Caribbean Utilities. The terminal, including all associated facilities, could probably be constructed for about $2.5 million. That was back in 1979. Additional costs to consumers would be 2 to 3 cents per gallon. It is felt that this is a very small insurance premium to pay in comparison with the significant damage that an interruption in the supplies could cause to the economy of the islands. The size of the facilities would be sufficient to unload a complete 15,000-ton tanker. And they say the storage facilities should preferably not be built by any of the private companies in order to avoid a monopoly situation. Instead, it is thought that it could be operated as a public facility or a joint venture providing services to anyone for a fee of 2 to 3 cents a gallon. This would have various advantages. The first advantage is competition would increase because more petroleum products or LPG distributors could enter the market, and this may bring prices down and diversity source of supply. And number two, Caribbean utilities would obtain and handle diesel on the basis of a bidding procedure involving other partners than just Texaco and Esso, again resulting in lower costs. And number three, the number of calls made by tankers would be significantly reduced, resulting in a savings on freight charges and rates. And number four, from the environment point of view, the tank farm would be considerably safer than an expansion of current Esso and Texaco facilities. So what does that tell us? And the report goes on to talk about distribution and so forth. Now, in 1979, this report to the United Nations about the fuel situation in the Cayman Islands recommended
38 years ago.
38 years ago, and it's still nothing has been done about it. Even though this report recommended that instead of allowing the present people who sell fuel in the country also store the fuel, the report say that would have caused a monopoly situation, which it has happened to us. And it says there should be a public storage facility with private sector. That means the government should get into it with the private sector, buy the fuel and sell it to the gas stations at a lower price.
And of course, if the government did that, they could buy fuel from whomever else they chose in bulk and sell it to the present suppliers. But it seems that the present suppliers supply themselves, or they have their own constraints built within those that they service by their brand. So, it's 38 years ago, and really, Mr. McField, it does seem as if the time has passed, and the time has surely come, where a similar type of study should be carried out. Imagine 38 years ago that Cayman, with a very small population, was burning more gasoline than the UK
or Saudi Arabia
per capita.
Per capita.
That is something to think about. Now maybe it's gone 10 times over that, but at least the facts would be there. But do we hear anything like that being suggested? I certainly haven't heard it.
I certainly haven't heard anything about it. And this report, if people don't have it, they can. I think they can get it from myself, or they can get it from you, if they want to have a copy of this report. Made in November 1979, a report to the United Nations about the petroleum system in the Cayman Islands. They can get it. It's readily available, and perhaps it is something that they could I would say advance upon, because today we would need to have an up-to-date report to see how outdated this report is, or how up-to-date this report is. But I know for a fact that if in 1979 we were burning more petroleum per capita than in the UK or Saudi Arabia, it probably is 3 times to 10 times as much now in 2017.
I would absolutely think so. I believe we need to go to break at this time. So when we come back, this will be our last break, and there are some other subjects we wanted to touch on. We'll see whether we're able to do that or not. Do stay tuned. You're listening to For the Record. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to For the Record, where we have with us in the studio Mr. Steve McField, who is the co-host of this show, and I have been your host, filling in for Mr. Oric Conley, Gilbert McLean. And one of the areas, Mr. McField, that we spoke about and thought that it would be, that it was necessary, and it should be necessary to actually state that it has happened. You know, there was a question about the event allegedly that took place in Florida involving the Speaker of the House, and that has since been dropped, and they officially, from the officials in Florida, that says they're pursuing no case against the Speaker, and so it's a dead issue in effect. But you did mention on Wednesday that we should look at the role of the Speaker, and we only have a little bit of time left. But that is so important. I don't know, perhaps we can mention it today and then maybe have a more detailed discussion on it come Monday, because you know, everyone has their own story, and this should happen and that should happen and so forth and so on. But I don't think that there's a whole lot of persons who really understand the detailed duties and responsibilities of the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, and it would be good to be able to discuss this for the benefit of all concerned. What is the present situation in Cayman, where the head of the legislature, our parliament as such, is a civil servant. It's not under the Speaker. The fact that it should be under the Speaker, we could go into those type of details. There's also one call. This will be the last call we'll take in this particular segment, but let's take that call and then perhaps we can open the discussion on it. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. Please go ahead.
Good morning.
Caller, we're not hearing you. You. Oh, okay. We're hearing you now. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Right, so.
You know, God bless you guys and continue the good work, and I will see you on Monday.
Good.
Thank you very much, caller. And, you know, what the caller says, there's a whole lot of truth to it.
Well, Mr. McLean, just as a preliminary for our show on Monday, I would just like to share with your listeners here and abroad a little bit of history about the speaker. Why we have a speaker in the Legislative Assembly now, and why he's called a speaker. I'd just like to share a little bit of history.
Definitely.
Now, the speaker has been part of the British parliamentary system since 1377. The first person to be called the speaker was Sir Thomas Hungerford. Now, in the beginning, the speaker was responsible for carrying messages. He was a messenger, the first. He was a messenger. Often complaints of grievances from the people's representatives, that's the House of Commons, to the King or Queen. This explains the title of Speaker, the one person empowered to speak to the monarch on behalf of Parliament. That's how the Speaker started.
Yeah.
At the time, the Speaker advised Parliament of what the monarch's wishes and conveyed to the monarch what the responses was from Parliament. Now, this was a potential hazardous profession because the monarch was up to express his displeasure at Parliament's reply by putting a speaker to death. So history records at least 9 cases where the speaker was dealt with by the king, because when he brought back the message from Parliament to the king, the king didn't like that, so he would kill the speaker. Now, this rather bloody and dangerous past explains why a speaker, upon election, will pretend to be reluctantly to take the speaker's chair and must be dragged to the front of the chamber. That is still happens in England. The first speaker were not appointed by Parliament but by the monarch. So the speaker was a go-between the king and Parliament.
The representatives, yeah.
Now the speaker was there to manage Parliament on behalf of the king or the queen, and not to serve as an impartial arbiter of the proceedings. Now, as the power of Parliament grew, the speaker was no longer the agent of the monarch. And in the famous incident in 1642, when Speaker Lendell refused Charles I to hand over men who were hiding in Parliament, and when Charles came into Parliament, Speaker Langwell, this is what he told him: "I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as the House is pleased to direct me, whose servant I am here." And then Charles had to leave because he says, "I am now the servant of the Parliament and not the king." So by the end of the 17th century, the speaker was fully independent, appointed by the House of Commons. So that is how the beginning of the speaker speak.
The 17th century,
yes,
imagine.
Yes.
And this
Yes.
is we're in the 21st,
Yeah.
and we do not have an independent speaker
Yes.
in charge of Parliament.
Yes.
Mr. McField, I think that is a good point to end on for today, because we've actually come to the end of our time here on For the Record. But it's a fascinating story to be told, and you've just told some of it there, where the speaker is concerned. And the fact is that in Cayman, perhaps we are I don't know what the situation is in other the overseas territories, but if there are others, there are not many, in my opinion, where the business of Parliament, the business of the legislature, is not under the authority of the speaker. Except here, the way it is in Cayman.
Exactly.
And personally, when I was a legislator, both minister and backbencher, my advocacy was that should change. But again, only in Cayman. But it got to be time to change it now. It really should be. So
Yes, and when we come back on Monday, we will continue about the role of the speaker now. Now that we know how he came about,
Right.
historically. Now we'll talk about his role. And the
Absolutely.
reason why we never mentioned this before on the radio is because the matter was a police matter. And
Yes.
we did not want to talk about that because we did not want to hamper the police investigation in the whole matter. And I think that was the way to handle it. And I think now that the speaker has been exonerated, I think we can talk about it freely now.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, I want to thank you for being here, Dr. McField, lending your very important opinion and legal voice on a number of these issues we have dealt with today. I want to thank the callers who did call in on the show. And to our listeners at home and abroad, we hope you've been informed to some extent and that you will come back and be with us on Monday. I am your host, Gilbert McLean, who has been sitting in for Mr. Orit Connor. So today is Friday, unlike the slip earlier about it being Wednesday. It is Friday the 11th of August. So enjoy your weekend and the rest of your day.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.